Many Cold War narratives place at their center the ideological struggle between the USSR and the United States, between communism and capitalism. And while the anti-capitalist stance of the USSR is well understood, the staunch anti-communist stance of the United States is one that is often simply presented as a given. So we felt we wanted to explore this topic a little bit more, to investigate why anti-communism was the default position by the end of the Second World War. I'm your host David, and we are going to start this examination with a look at a key factor in this, American anti-Semitism before 1939. This is the Cold War. Okay, so anti-communist movements and xenophobia have gone hand in hand in America since the late 19th century. Socialist and anarchist groups had been growing in strength since the 1870s, and nativists were afraid of the radicalism they could instigate among the lower classes. While this radicalism became more prominent in the labor movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, something we will discuss in a later video, it also impacted Americans' views of immigrants. The high levels of immigration from Europe during this period was blamed for the influx of extreme political views like socialism, anarchism, and communism. And naturally, like in so many other parts of the world, one of the groups who faced this aggressive xenophobia and were often associated with communism, socialism, and Bolshevism was the Jewish community. As you are no doubt aware, anti-Semitism is one of the most enduring forms of prejudice in the world, occurring across many countries and regions and for over 2,000 years. In Europe, it became an increasingly violent problem from about the Middle Ages onwards. Now, in the early Americas, which was primarily settled by immigrants and colonists from Europe, they brought those prejudices with them. As far back as the 17th century, Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch Director General of the colony of New Netherlands, called Jews, quote, the deceitful race, such hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ, end quote. However violent this sounds, anti-Semitism in America began to grow much more aggressive towards the end of the 19th century. Pogroms in the Russian Empire led to a flood of Jewish immigrants arriving on American shores, more than 3 million between 1881 and 1920, of which 1.75 million came between 1900 and 1924. While before 1900, Jews had made up less than 1% of the American population, that percentage had increased to 3.5% by 1930, and many non-Jewish Americans didn't trust them, or at least resented them, often because some Jews seemed both socially and financially upwardly mobile. Economic upheaval culminating in the Depression of 1893 provided fuel for anti-Semites in America. While Jews played only a minor role in America's commercial banking system, being primarily involved in investment banking, the big names of Jewish banking firms like Rothschild made them an easy target for those who wanted someone to blame for the economic disaster that faced America. Members of the Populist Party were especially fond of blaming Jews and other foreign sources for the ill fortune of American farmers. It likely also didn't help the Jewish community that labor unions, as we'll examine further in another video, were often targeted as being influenced or even organized by communists or socialists, with many Jewish individuals being involved in the leadership of those labor movements. Samuel Gompers and Daniel de Leon were both Jewish by background. Yiddish newspapers like Die Zukunft and Vorwärts were often associated with labor organizing, while others like Freie Arbeiterstimme were overtly labor-oriented. The Uprising of the 20,000, which was a massive 4-month strike in 1909 and 1910, led by the International Ladies' Garment Workers Union, was mostly composed of Jewish and Italian women, with only a few men. It was called for by Clara Lemlich, a young Jewish woman. The oath taken by strikers was a version of an old Jewish oath. If I turn traitor to the cause I now pledge, may my right hand wither from the arm I raise. Clara Lemlich went on to become a founding member of the Communist Party in America in 1919. So, the connection between the Jewish community and organized labor was not without some merit. But that connection didn't exist because of Judaism, and more because of the complex set of social and industrial relations that existed at the time. However, the Jewish community in America would face continued anti-Semitism connected to communism and to other anti-Semitic stereotypes throughout the early 20th century. Now, in 1913, a Jewish factory superintendent in Atlanta, Georgia, named Leo Frank, was put on trial and found guilty for the murder of a 13-year-old girl employed at Frank's factory. The trial and subsequent appeals drew a great deal of attention, and media at the time fanned the flames of anti-Semitism. By 1915, after the Supreme Court had denied a final appeal, the state governor commuted Frank's death sentence. But a mob entered the prison, kidnapped Frank, and lynched him. This event had two major impacts. The first was the 1913 founding of the Anti-Defamation League by Sigmund Livingston, himself a German-born American Jewish attorney from Chicago. This organization would become the leading Jewish group fighting anti-Semitism in the United States. The other effect of the Frank trial and lynching was that leaders of the group who lynched Frank would go on to gather at Stone Mountain later that year in November and revive the Ku Klux Klan, who this time around focused as much on anarchists, communists, and Jews as they had on African Americans in previous years. During the First World War, American Jews were targeted as slackers, war profiteers, and, quote, more apt to malinger than the native born, end quote. That's from the US Army Manual published for war recruits, by the way. This was likely fueled by two things: anti-Semitism and the fact that German Jews, who were in truth mostly from Austria, represented a huge percentage of Jewish immigrants to the United States during the late 19th and early 20th century. Anti-German views were extremely prevalent during the First World War, making Jewish immigrants, who were assumed to be German, doubly targets of bigotry. This then brings us to the interwar years. As just mentioned, the Ku Klux Klan had begun to grow in strength and influence once again, increasing the amount of anti-Semitic content in radio broadcasts and in newspapers throughout the period. In addition, Jews encountered increased restrictions on immigration. While immigration legislation in the 1920s, such as the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, was not specifically worded to target Jews, it was increasingly targeted at Eastern European countries, which had large Jewish populations. This effectively ended the flood of Jewish immigration that had begun in 1881. Quotas on Jewish enrollment in many private universities during this period made college acceptance more difficult for many Jews in America as well. In Gerard Burroughs' book, A History of Yale's School of Medicine, Passing Torches to Others, he writes that, quote, a member of the admissions committee at Yale Medical, Harry Zimmerman, said that Milton Winternitz's instructions to the committees were explicit in 1922. Never admit more than 5 Jews, take only 2 Italian Catholics, and take no blacks at all, end quote. Yale had a policy which was in place until the early 1960s, by the way, which restricted the school's Jewish student body to around 10%. Historian David Ashinsky wrote, quote, most of the surrounding medical schools, Cornell, Columbia, Pennsylvania, and Yale, had rigid quotas in place. In 1935, Yale accepted 76 applicants from a pool of 501. About 200 of those applicants were Jewish, and only 5 got in, end quote. In addition to this, many restaurants, country clubs, and other social establishments, as well as white-collar jobs in banking, insurance, law firms, and faculty positions at universities, had quotas, restrictions, or outright bans on Jews. And then there's the matter of Henry Ford. One of the most prevalent sources of anti-Semitic information was from the Henry Ford publication, The Dearborn Independent. Ford was a pacifist who opposed the First World War, but more than that, he believed that the entirety of the blame for the war lay with one race, the Jews. A close friend of Ford's once recalled a camping trip in 1919 where Ford lectured the group of friends as they sat around a campfire. He, quote, attributes all evil to Jews or to the Jewish capitalists, the friend wrote in his diary. The Jews caused the war. The Jews caused the outbreak of thieving and robbery all over the country. The Jews caused the inefficiency of the Navy, end quote. Ford seemed to believe that Jews, as bankers, instigated the war to profit from it. It was also around this time that Ford purchased the Dearborn Independent, his hometown newspaper. By 1919, he was actively printing and distributing anti-Semitic conspiracies throughout this paper, including publishing portions of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion a fabricated anti-Semitic text that described a plan for Jewish global domination. No space lasers, though. The Dearborn Independent also published a series of 91 articles in a newspaper under the title The International Jew in the early 1920s. The articles included titles like Germany's Reaction Against the Jew, Does a Definite Jewish World Program Exist?, An Introduction to the Jewish Protocols, Does Jewish Power Control the World Press?, The All-Jewish Mark on Red Russia, Jewish Testimony in Favor of Bolshevism, and The Jewish Element in Bootlegging Evil. These are headlines that would look right at home in any German newspaper circa 1942. Now, speaking of Germany, the content of The International Jew was translated into 16 languages, with 6 editions sold in Germany alone between 1920 and 1922. Ford was well liked in Germany. In 1924, Heinrich Himmler, yes, that Heinrich Himmler, described Ford as, quote, one of our most valuable, important, and witty fighters, end quote. And Ford is the only American mentioned positively in Mein Kampf. Quote, only a single great man, Ford, who to the Jews' fury still maintains full independence from the controlling masters of the producers in a nation of 120 millions, end quote. In 1931, to a Detroit newspaper reporter, Hitler said he regarded Ford as his inspiration, explaining his reason for keeping Ford's life-size portrait next to his desk. Ford's paper was influential domestically and internationally. It influenced future anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and notably began to popularize the idea that communism and Bolshevism were linked to the Jewish people. There's a dark humor to the idea that in anti-Semitic rhetoric during the late 19th century, Jews had become synonymous with capitalism, but when anti-Semitic sentiment began to grow again in the early 20th century, they were responsible for communism. From the early 1930s, there was a further drastic increase in anti-Semitism in the United States, echoing what was happening in Europe at the time. Right-wing factions naturally blamed the Great Depression on the Jews. Jews were also linked to the Roosevelt administration, as FDR had welcomed many Jewish Americans into government jobs and positions within the administration. As a result, Depression-era policies such as the New Deal, which aimed to keep the American economy afloat, were often seen as inspired or even controlled by Jews and communists. The Venn diagram of people who believed this was basically a single circle. Roosevelt's New Deal was derisively referred to as the Jew Deal by the Knights of the White Camellia, a white supremacist organization based in the American South, similar to the Ku Klux Klan. The New Deal was denounced by anti-Semitic figures like Father Coughlin, as well as fascist organizations such as the Silver Shirts, that's the Silver Legion of America, which warned Americans about a Jewish infiltration of Christian government. William Dudley Pelley, the founder of the Silver Legion of America, called FDR Dutch Jew Franklin Roosevelt. These views were only validated in the minds of anti-Semitic demagogues when Eleanor Roosevelt advocated for increased Jewish immigration from Germany as the Nazi regime rose to greater power and anti-Semitism in Europe began to grow rapidly more violent. Despite Eleanor's support for increased immigration for Jewish refugees, Roosevelt was hesitant to protect Jewish refugees, even turning away from U.S. ports the SS St. Louis, a ship filled with Jewish refugees. Undoubtedly, this was impacted by the anti-Semitic opinions among Americans at the time. Opinion polls showed widespread racial prejudice, with 60% of respondents to one 1938 poll having a low opinion of Jews, labeling them greedy, dishonest, and pushy. 41% said that Jews had too much power in the United States, and this figure had risen to 58% by 1945. Now, one of the loudest of the demagogues spreading these ideas was Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin was a Catholic priest who had a weekly radio program which, by the late 1930s, attracted between 5 and 12 million listeners. He also published a newspaper titled Social Justice, which had a circulation of about 800,000 in 1937. It was there that he published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, as well as other anti-Semitic writings and documents. In both his writing and radio show, Coughlin was sympathetic to Hitler and Mussolini, as he saw fascism as the way to defeat Bolshevism. Coughlin would also blame the Depression on an international conspiracy of Jewish bankers and claimed that Jewish bankers were behind the Russian Revolution. He also claimed the rise of Marxism in Europe was a Jewish plot, and even lifted parts of a speech by Joseph Goebbels for the December 5, 1938 issue of Social Justice. 2,000 of Coughlin's followers marched in New York on December 18, 1938. They were protesting a potential change to asylum laws that would allow more Jews, including refugees from Hitler's persecution. Chants included, quote, "Send Jews back where they came from in leaky boats," and "Wait until Hitler comes over here," end quote. On November 20, 1938, only 2 weeks after Kristallnacht, Coughlin blamed the Jewish victims, saying that, quote, "Jewish persecution only followed after Christians were first persecuted," end quote. After this speech, and as his programs became more anti-Semitic, some radio stations, including those in New York and Chicago, began refusing to air his speeches without pre-approved scripts. In New York, his programs were cancelled by WINS and WMCA, leaving Coughlin to broadcast on the Newark part-time station WHBI. This made Coughlin a hero in Nazi Germany, where papers ran headlines like, "America is not allowed to hear the truth." And then we need to consider the America First Committee. Founded in 1940, the America First Committee claimed to advocate for the isolation of the United States, but there were many anti-Semitic and pro-fascist individuals involved in the organization. Charles Lindbergh was one of the most well-known and influential members, and with his endorsement, the committee peaked at 800,000 paying members across the country. At a rally held in Des Moines, Iowa on September 11, 1941, Lindbergh gave a speech indicating that he believed 3 groups were responsible for pushing America to join the war: the Roosevelt administration, the British, and, you guessed it, the Jews. He also believed that the Jewish people's, quote, "greatest danger to this country lies in their large ownership and influence in our motion pictures, our press, our radio, and our government," end quote, a common trope for anti-Semitic rhetoric. In later diary entries, Lindbergh also expressed his belief that, quote, "we must limit to a reasonable amount the Jewish influence. Whenever the Jewish percentage of total population becomes too high, a reaction seems to invariably occur. It is too bad, because a few Jews of the right type are, I believe, an asset to any country," end quote. And yet another anti-Semitic group that flourished in the pre-Second World War era was the German-American Bund. It was formed in 1933 when Nazi Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess gave a German immigrant and Nazi Party member Heinz Specknöbel authority to form an American Nazi organization. The organization was, as you might expect, openly pro-Nazi, and it worked to force German-language press in America to print pro-Nazi articles. They established training camps across the country and held rallies with Nazi insignia and Nazi salutes, and attacked the Roosevelt administration, calling FDR Frank D. Rosenfeld. They also engaged in propaganda regarding Bolshevik Jewish conspiracy theories, and this combination of anti-Semitic and anti-communist views spilled over to critique of FDR's New Deal as well. So, as you can see from this examination, there was a long history of anti-Semitism in the United States in the pre-war period. This history, while troubling in and of itself, had a long reach into the Cold War period, as anti-Semitic narratives tied into and merged with connections to pro-communist and pro-Bolshevik narratives. It was in this way that a fear of the other transmuted itself from xenophobia into a strong and pervasive anti-ideological movement, helping to set the stage for the strong anti-Soviet nature of the post-war United States. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future episodes in this series, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have avoided conflating the religious and ethnic background of the button with belief in the political and economic system of some other bell button. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our supporters, and if you aren't already a patron, please consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.